Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Kelly. I'm the marketing and production coordinator at New West Press. And I want to thank you all for coming. It just started raining in Edmonton, so I know I'm not ruining a beautiful day outside anymore, so it's always nice. You can all sit in the dark with me and celebrate Nisha's birthday. Woo! I'm not going to sing or try to make people sing happy birthday to you, Nisha, because I'm just not going to do that, but I'm so happy you were born. And I will be throwing links into the chat box where you can get the book. Our official booksellers today are Glass Bookshop and Shelf Life Books in Calgary, Glass Bookshops in Edmonton. And we're here on Zoom for two reasons, as I said. First, to wish Nisha the happiest of birthdays. Second, to celebrate her debut poetry collection, Coconut. We are also joined by the award-winning Bertrand Bickersteth, and he's going to be reading from his poetry book, The Responsive Weeds, and Nisha will, of course, be reading from Coconut. We are recording the event. You can leave your cameras off, you can leave your cameras on, whatever you feel comfortable with. And after Nisha and Bertrand read, we'll be having a Q&A. There's a chat box. If you either move your finger around the screen, you should be able to find it, or your mouse if you're on a desktop like I am, feeling like it's 2007. You should be able to find the chat box and you can put your questions in there and I'll read them out loud during the question period. Oh yeah, as Nisha asked, is anyone here under 18? If so, lucky. No, being 17 was pretty rough. That's dishonest.
I feel like 17 is a little acceptable for my subject matter, but 12, 13, probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sure you have homework if you're 12 or 13. Log off, go do your homework, secretly watch the video on YouTube later. No. So we're coming to you from Edmonton, Olds, and Calgary. That's where the bookstores and the poets are located. We acknowledge that the lands that we're gathering on are the traditional gathering places for many Indigenous peoples. We honor, respect, and celebrate the history, languages, ceremonies, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call these territories home. I don't like to just blurt through a land acknowledgement. Here's something you can do if you're in Alberta. It's the place where both books we're here to celebrate take place. You can access the Prairie Indigenous ebook collection, which has over 200 titles by Indigenous writers, books published in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. I will also be putting the link in the chat for that. And basically it'll tell you which libraries in Alberta you can find the Prairie ebook collection. Read what these great writers are writing, engage, buy the books if you can. And you can do that from the links I'll be putting up for the bookstores. Up first tonight is Bertrand. Born in Sierra Leone, Bertrand Bickersteth grew up in Edmonton, Calgary, and Olds, Alberta. I already listed those places once. After an English degree at UBC, Bertrand continued studying in the UK and later taught in the US. A return to Alberta provided him with new insights of Black identity, and most of his writing has been committed to asking, what does it mean to be Black and from the prairies? His work has been anthologized and has appeared in literary journals. His debut collection, The Responsive Weeds, is the winner of the 2021 Gerald Lampert Memorial Award for Best Debut Collection from, what's the name? LCP.
League of Canadian Poets. Yeah.
League of Canadian Poets. I'm so used to LCP. And he's currently up for the Stephen G. Stephenson Award for Poetry and the City of Calgary W.O. Mitchell Book Prize. He lives in Calgary, teaches at Olds College, and writes everywhere. Welcome, Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much for that introduction. And of course, a very special happy birthday to Nisha. What a great day to be celebrating the launch of a poetry collection. So I don't have my hands on it yet, but I really look forward to it. And something I didn't tell you, Nisha, when we were in the green room, pre-discussion, pre-presentation, is I wrote a poem many years ago that was called, let's see if I can remember it correctly. It's alphabetical. It's called Apples, Bananas, Coconuts, and Oreos. Yeah, ABCO, that's right. And there was something to do with Alberta Company something, but you know, all of the right fruits in there, right? If I could remember it, I wouldn't recite it to you because I think I was about 17 when I wrote it. So we don't need to hear that poetry. But I really look forward to hearing reading Coconut and experiencing a proper version of an exploration of those particular themes. So those of you who are not used to that language, you probably are not aware of how different it is for people of color to grow up in this part of the world and to feel like they can belong to this part of the world. And that is indeed what my collection of poems tries to explore and tries to express. Oh, I forgot to start my timer. I think I've been talking for 2 minutes, I think. Yeah, okay. I can go on and on, so I need timers, I really do. You know, hearing things like, hearing that title, Coconut, of course, I thought, oh yeah, that just reverberates all kinds of things. Because in part, you know, we feel like we're from here, but then people from here don't let us feel like we're from here. And then often you go back to your family, maybe a visit back to the quote unquote home country. And those people just say, no, you're just like a white person. You're not like one of us, right? And so you never quite feel like you belong. But we do belong. And I knew that if I worked hard enough at it, I could find ways into my sense of belonging. And so for me, it had to do a lot with connecting history to landscape to my personal biography. And so some of the poems I'm going to read from you tonight, and I made it sound like I'm going to read 20, but I'm only going to read 3.5, actually. But these poems are drawn from nature and mostly from rivers are the examples I'm going to give you tonight. So this first one is called The Bow. It's a river in Calgary, for those of you who are here. And it features a historical figure. His name was Stephen Bonga. Sometimes he is known as Bongo or Bonza. He was a black fur trader that you were never taught about in high school or in any of your schooling. His mother was actually Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, and his father was black. His father's name was Pierre, possibly from the Caribbean originally, possibly, but we don't know. The whole family became known as fur traders in the 1700s, late 1700s, and early 1800s. And Stephen is one of the first black figures to step foot on this territory that we know today as Alberta. So this is called The Bow. He was involved in what was called the Bow Expedition back then. The Bow. I only know rivers, waters elongated to the unrumpled recitative of endless land. The bow knows, has tongued and grooved the firmament, baby, of this last best. The bow knows Stony and Sarcee. The bow knows blood, the buffalo spilled beyond its banks. The bow knows Crowfoot, his belly, his old man, softens his reservations, curses his merry. The bow knows Bungo, trickles over his chipped away Chippewa, black and bisected by befuddled namings, by bemused memory, by his own fickle fur trading, with us, with them, Negro, Ojibwe, exposed by history or submerged below. No ocean, no tide, no salt, no sea, too flat, too far to see. I only knows rivers, baby, but what I only knows disturbs in me. That was The Bow. And now I am going to read to you another river called the Athabasca. And it actually is a river in Alberta. It's in northern Alberta. Very interesting river, actually, because this is a river that flows northward. And although there is no actual up and down on the planet, we do tend to think of the north as the top of the map. And so we just assume that gravity should take its course. But of course, nature is different from what humans impose on it. And in a sense, that's part of what my poetry and this poem is trying to get across. So this poem deals with the Athabasca, which flows into a northward delta and has, for me, resonances with a southern delta that we're very familiar with. It's connected to Black history. So here we go, the Athabasca. We might fall on this side of the continental divide, but even our waters defy the latitude of gravity, following no one, flowing on the uplift drift northward, and not east or west or south. And did you know that it comes to its near death in a northern delta, enclosed from the coast, stranded on impertinent land, before it slips past and joins the slave on its implacable escape to the north? No Mississippi heat, no growling Delta bluesman, unless you count that gathering of Intuit Inuit over there and hear her in the core of the cud, reforging growl into gorgeous by intuiting some inquisitive ancestors, maybe Thule and Matthew Henson, maybe Negro of the North. She's got no woman, she's got no job, she's got no truck, she's got no dog, she's got no history that no one knows, and it's too cold for the blues. If she had only followed the river against its inclination, she would have made it south to the lesser of the slave lakes, landing eventually at Athabasca, landing and happening to land in circa 1915 would have been surrounded by the warmth of people who bring the blues with their bloodlines. Landed in Athabasca, honey. Got no time to fool. Said I'm stopped in Athabasca. Ain't the kind to fool. Well, I was game in Oklahoma, but that place was much too cool. We too read advertisements for 160 acres and no mule. That was the Athabasca. I believe I have time for one more if I don't jibber jabber too much. Here, I am going to skip over to this one. Oh, this is a short one. So this is my half. I'll do my half and then I'll squeeze in another one. Okay, all right. So this is called Past the Surface of Whiteness. It's not a river poem, but it is nature. And I think the title says everything. Past the Surface of Whiteness. Now I'm looking at a field, coping under a layering of spring snow. A moment ago, it was actual spring. A moment before that, it was permanent winter. Now I am led to believe in the dumb patience of fields, not unintelligent nor quiescent, but unhurried, hewn and hewed in quiet. If whatever dreams beneath poked a tendril of color past this new surface, it would provide a new birth, starving in a world of white. Or startling. Yeah, that's my half poem. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to change gears slightly here. Okay, and I am going to now assault you with an anthemic poem of mine. It's actually from a, well, it's anthologized. It's in another collection, but I am hoping to have this poem be published in another collection, possibly by New West Press sometime soon. So I am giving you guys a little bit of an in on this, okay? So this is a poem that's called We Too, and comes from this anthology here called The Great Black North. It's an anthology of contemporary African Canadian poetry. And this poem here is kind of my anthem to Black Alberta. Sometimes I call Black Alberta Berta, just because that's who she is to me, all right? And this is my anthem. I can't really set it up because it's just got a ton of history. And I've taken all these historical figures and these signs and signifiers for Alberta and prairie identity and that sort of thing, and I sort of wrap them up all together in an onslaught of words. The one thing I will tell you is this is a poem that was initially inspired by Langston Hughes, who has a poem called I Too. And it's I Too Sing America. And I thought that was such a lovely sentiment, a wonderful way of expressing your sense of belonging in an environment that does not accept your belonging. And so I borrowed that I Too, and I made it communal, we too. All right, here we go. We too. We too sing Alberta, from the first jail in Calgary and the wrong belonging of this familiar place. We too sing of Cyclone, the big black buck. Too sing for Cyclone, sing like Cyclone, the big black buck, the eternal northern star of the greatest outdoor show on earth. We too wail in these northlands, this side of la rivière de la paix. Oui, je peux chanter, il te faut chanter ici aussi. This foe was not our fault. This dislocated Harlem farming just north of Athabasca, you called, we responsed. All right, now we are okay here too. And KS, MS, MO, HO, and IL here too. And we too sing Alberta. The Babylon psalm rounded up along the erupted Rockies, one renamed ridge, and the evaporating elevated grain, the faded stain of segregated schools, the suppressed success of our homes, steaded in the prairie bush, the land, its hues, the language we hues, the simple blues of hues with the grinning dews of where, granted by McEwen, our prairie uncle. Two, the bellows and the bowels of the overground railroad, we sing, portered and pulled man, prairied by night, moonstruck by the days of a Chinook's shine at the hill's foot, shuffling to the pulse of black blood. We were babies born in tar sands, but we're not from here, sing the refrain. Where are you from? You know, this beat disrupture may sound wrong to you, but we too sing this strange Alberta song. Thank you very much. I think I'll wrap up there, folks. And I just want to once again thank you folks for inviting me in on this. Thanks Nisha as well for allowing me in on your birthday party. Happy birthday to you and all the success to Coconut.
Thanks so much, Bertrand. And send us your new manuscript. Well, it's worked out. I would love to work on it. Oh my God, I feel like such a time travel when I think of the books that will be submitted now and then will be coming out in the future. Suddenly a calendar just starts rolling behind my eyes. And
you grow old just thinking about your schedule, I know.
A glazed expression on my face. Yeah. But thank you so much. This brings us to Nisha.
You want me to just go in?
Oh, I'm doing your bio.
You can do my bio. Okay. I know everyone here, but okay.
Oh, you know everyone? Does anyone want to know Nisha's bio?
There's like two people I don't, but
I'll do it quick. I trust it. Don't worry.
Okay, yeah. Bertrand's gonna listen to it.
Nisha Patel is a queer spoken word poet and artist. She's the City of Edmonton's 8th Poet Laureate and the 2019 Canadian Individual Slam Champion. Don't worry, it won't be all the sentences from your bio online. It's just Nisha does a lot and has done a lot. Community building, slam performance, mentorship, writing multiple chapbooks, judging contests, judging for grants, leading workshops and festivals, self-starting residencies, co-founding a national queer femme South Asian artist collective, Maza Arts, and a publishing house centering on the work of marginalized poets, Moon Jelly House. So many things. She makes me tired thinking about it. And now she's written a full collection, Coconut. In fact, Nisha's debut book has already gone to reprint. I think before it officially came out, we did another reprint. which shows how much she has been a part of so many readers' lives already, so many poetry lovers' lives. And plus it's her birthday, so let's all give it up for Nisha.
Thank you. Yeah, today was a strange day. It was my last reading at City Council as the 8th Poet Laureate of the City of Edmonton. And to say that my life has really changed in the last 2 years in my term would be an understatement. There's a lot of really momentous things that have happened to me, but none of them really happened without community. And I mean community in, every sense of the word. Community sometimes that leaves you, community sometimes that you find for yourself. My family really coming around to poetry being a career, and that's a theme I'm going to read about today. This book, the manuscript was submitted back in maybe 2018 or 19. And to have it come out, the most recent poem in it is from 2019, which is 2 years ago almost, right? 1.5 at least. And so in some ways, there are themes in this book that I have moved from, that I needed to get out, and that are still there in to be accessible to the people who need it next. But in other ways, there are themes that sometimes I pick up this book and I'm like, you know what, I still stand by this. I'm still experiencing this. This is still my present and everyday life. This book is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of the experiences that I've had up until this point in my poetry career. For those of you, I lied, I do know only some of the people here, maybe half. For those of you who don't know, my background is actually in business economics and political science. I worked in politics for 3 years, and I reached a point of illness where I was hospitalized. And coming out of that period, I told myself that, if I was going to live a life that was maybe shorter than others, I wanted to do it doing the thing that made me the most happy, and that was performing poetry. A book is kind of something that a lot of spoken word poets don't imagine ourselves putting out. We put out chapbooks because they're easier, because they're more cost effective. Many of us grow up in a system being told that we don't do real poetry, or that our poetry is urban, which is codified for Black or, impoverished, or, that kind of thing. And the history of spoken word is Black, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And so having like a book actually do well with audiences that I don't even know, because I'll tell you right now, I don't know. I think everyone I know already has the book. So there's like hundreds of people who bought it who I don't know, because I've done the math, and that's just how it works out. I don't mean to, soapbox, but it is my book launch. And I just wanted to say that I am so thankful for all of you who are here. I've been on virtual tour for 2 months. It is exhausting. I'm doing almost 25 shows for this. The last time I toured in 2019 and 2020, I contracted a 3-month pneumonia that I thought I would die from. And you know what? Like, the pandemic has been really awful for a lot of people, but it's also allowed me to connect. There are people in this room who literally live across the country from each other, or whose jobs don't allow them to come downtown to a poetry reading, right? All the time, whose transit really sucks. And being able to see so many of you in one place is just incredibly touching for me. And I'm very emotional about it. So without further ado, I'm gonna read a few poems from this collection, but I'm also gonna read a few others, because of course, like, part of being a poet and performing so much is working on the next thing. And, I've had a lot to say since 2019. So I give you these poems as an offering. I hope that you cherish them and that you treasure them. If not, don't tell anyone about it. That's all I ask. All works out. That girl tweets about pussy like she has one, like she's sure she's seen it shatter. Once a stained glass, once a portrait of a lady raining down on her like the walls of Notre Dame. Fat girl thinks her pussy looks better than anything Kanye West could have described, like it's worth more than a scratch on an overhyped record. Fat girl has seen it in the mirror and not just the internet, knows its name and what country it comes from, which is to say that it belongs to nothing but the dirt. From the soaked brown earth, from the clenching of stomach and grin of a good woman who does not know her place. Fat girl tweets about pussy like she does not know her place, like it has an opinion on all the plastic she shoved into it, like her pussy is yet another ocean. Fat girl tweets about pussy like she's raised it herself, taught it to braid its hair and say please, sit quietly at recess, fight black with multiplication tables and math scores instead of her fists, tweets about pussy like it once finger painted itself directly on the floor into a bloody sunset or a car crash like its very existence once planted its flag on a white couch and salted the earth around it. Fat girl tweets about pussy like she used her mother's minimum wage to buy it a seat at the table. Fat girl takes up a whole seat at the table, gets stared at by fat men who have the audacity to ask her to lean back, to stand up and move, to breathe more shallowly around them, like white is worth more than dark meat, like their metaphors have always been ready to consume her and still ask her to say thank you, ask her to move all that pussy, to close her legs and walk away so that their sons can step on the bones she leaves in her wake and sell the sound of cracking spines to a symphony. Fat girl's pussy is the symphony. Fat girl tweets about pussy like she isn't one. And the men question if she even has one. Hidden in the origami of her thickness, have to reach beneath her, crook their fingers on her latch, check if she is still breathing or just holding back. How dare she hide that pussy? Is that pussy well-trained? Is that pussy going to behave? Is that pussy a man's best friend? Kneel, roll over. Who's a good girl now? Fat girl tweets about pussy because she has to. Because sometimes she reaches beneath her skirt and comes up empty-handed. Because if you put her pussy in a box and ask her to walk it home alone, she's not sure if she'll end up dead or asking for it. Fat girl tweets about pussy like she has a choice, to be licked to the bone, grated to the marrow, sucked and fondled and rubbed raw of everything that makes her whole. Fat girl tweets about pussy because this time she means it. This time when she says no, you will hear it and listen. This time you will understand that the universe makes mistakes and they sound exactly like your name. Fat girl tweets about pussy and none of the men who slide into her DMs walk away with their self-destructive hunger intact because fat girl and her pussy refuse to be called dessert any longer. Fat girl tweets about pussy and it exceeds the word limit, has too much character, too few flaws, could start a religion if she wanted it. Fat girl tweets about pussy over and over again, grips it with two hands, place house between her legs until coming down feels like coming home to cathedrals, dripping with Elmer's glue and war paint built to the sound of the first time her mother ever said her name. Thank you. My friend Luca is in the audience today. So Luca and I were on tour in Ottawa, and my friend Namitha is also in the audience today, where I debuted this poem. And I wrote it in Gatineau because I had booked us an Airbnb, which I thought was in a neighborhood of Ottawa, but it turns out Gatineau is its own city in a different province. So that was a fun adventure for me and Luca. Yeah, the Airbnb in Gatineau. Self-portrait as a tampon. A myth to think that I am either white or used, a one-time necessity to young legs that carried me across a soccer field when the boys still pushed back without fear. I am bloodied and burdened with the weight of growing breasts and swallowed words, taking space in a stomach that clenches inward. I wait for the yank and pull on my hair, wonder which part of me will grow up to be discarded. What is a country if not a woman's body, landlocked and drowning at the same time? We reach a border when we touch. And what is a border if not a woman's flesh? The way it is porous, wounds itself and stitches back together, shows the walls it builds. I was told to inhale within a rib cage that expanded within the gap between a man's fist, told to sweat salt water into swimming pools, cry quietly and alone for what is loneliness if not the space between a woman's legs, the air that throws itself down a man's throat, what is a man, if not a woman's impending startle, impacting ground all at once. Where else have we been told to grow, if not beneath the pad of thumb? How do we reach now when we exhale from even our toes? What is longing if not the tongue of a woman, saying her own name where no one can hear? So one of the conversations that I've had with folks is about how much I write about my mother, how much I write about womanhood and femininity. And it's interesting because my first chapbook was really mostly about my father, and family just becomes this thing that at times is more prevalent or less prevalent. And it wasn't until I was on the news really that my mother accepted this was an acceptable job. So many of the conversations we had in earlier times were very difficult ones, that I had left behind a government job, which in many countries that aren't Canada is a stable job, right? It's a secure job. It's a job with benefits and pension and has all the things that our parents came here for. And leaving that behind with them not knowing that I was, a political analyst that was treated like shit because I was a woman and a young woman at that, was something they didn't understand. My parents actually interventioned me, like total sitcom style. They sent a relative on me who I had never met before to kind of talk me out of the lack of direction in my life. And I find that really funny because anyone who knows me knows that I have never lacked direction at any point in my life ever. So this poem is called Conversation from the Artist to Her Mother. In Gujarati, I do not know how to say I am enough. Je suis assez. How I too wish I could have suspended myself indefinite, a goldfish girl forever, scales and skin iridescent, exhaling myself into the bowl that would hold enough float to breathe in the artificial sunrise, in the yellow garma, in the warmth of meeting your expectations with the hope that I would one day build a sandcastle dream that looked so much like the 9 to 5 of yours, a desk, plant, a paycheck, the lifeblood of your forfeited years that you mixed and cemented to build the house around us would be the only part of me that stayed an anchor, so long as my tanked ambition fit into glass walls for the rest of the world to tap at and to cherish. Instead, I learned to suck on the sour of guilt. J'ai un rêve, cum man sharam lage, for still I dream, and I am ashamed. In Gujarati, I do not know how to say I love you. Instead, I learn it in French class, study the way it fits unspoken between my teeth. Je t'aime. I still have yet to find it a landed home, a shelf on the wall to infuse with the spices scents, the garam masala, the jiru, the hing that permeate this house. In this house, we do not know how to say I love you without an aftertaste. I wonder how I can love the coat hangers, the velarn, the rolling pins that leave no marks. I do not pass French class, but at home I master the body language of anger, of dishonor, jaipur, that only a child's skin can pen. In Gujarati, avec toi, je ne parle pas d'amour. With you, I do not speak of love. If I do, my lips bend unwilling and fragile, brittle with the cold, tongue scraping the fragments of a dialect you call home, like chipped ice to melt in your mouth, something that once resembled a conversation you'd fancied having with me, a daughter you wished had built herself into dreams worth leaving a life behind for. Pourquoi es-tu un artiste in Gujarati? Je ne suis pas comme toi. I am nothing like you. Dis-moi, ça valait le coup. Was it worth it? In Gujarati, je suis so. I try to wash your mother's eyes across the sink with the stained black ink water with yesterday's paintbrush, run off dreams and follow as the color once more crowds down the mouth of a drain that has seen too much of me not to taste all the salted ways that I have tried to love myself into being une fille parfaite, armdam, sari chokri, and in the rest of my empty verses and blank canvases. Je suis un artiste. I write, je suis désolé. Miane mane maaf karo. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. I think I'm going to end with the poem I shared at City Council today. It's not in any book yet because it was written last night at around 2 a.m. Obviously, that's how I finish most of my commission these days. So I start because I owe a debt of gratitude to the former Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, Amanda Gorman, who comes from a spoken word tradition, who has been brought up in a Black spoken word tradition and has taken on a role of spreading an art form that for many have the least barriers to entry. And that's why we hate young poets sometimes, because they didn't have to go to school to be poets. And they didn't have to get master's degrees or PhDs. And some of them are being published, and older folks are mad at that. And older folks are finding poetry too, and younger folks are happy about that. And so poetry is really this thing that has been a gateway for me, a guide for me, a form of prayer for me. I actually met my fiance through an open mic at a poetry reading. My partner is a poet. Poetry is a part of our lives. And I'm going to start with a quote from Amanda Gorman. Poetry is political because it is preoccupied with people. In search of alternative names for Churchill Square, Sir Winston Churchill wrote of my Indian ancestors that we were a beastly people. After his government looted my motherland's wealth, the Queen still wears her stolen jewels. Churchill engineered concentration camps in South Africa and called it great fun. He swore there would not be a Japanese left on the face of the earth. He crushed resistance in the Irish and stole land from the Kenyans. He had an insatiable appetite for glorious, delicious war. For 12 years of public school, I swore on a true north, free of influence or intimidation. And yet on paper, we are subjects of a historical and present empire continually committing genocide in the name of dominion. Your worship, today is my 29th birthday, and I have lived through hatred, racism, and discrimination. But at the end of my life, my children will know what I stood for and what I faced. They will fight for no one to endure historical or present denigration. At the age of 29, Lillian Shirt raised a teepee in view of the mayor's office on treaty land and lived there for 12 whole days. She protested anti-Indigenous prejudice in the very place we hold candlelight vigils that should burn in an endless blaze. Winston wrote that he did not admit that a great wrong had been done to the Red Indians. To Churchill, we gave sainthood and noble laureateship, and to Lillian, we denied housing and cemented meridians. Churchill gassed Iraqis and called it humane. He praised Mussolini's hatred in the war against unions. Jerusalem erected a statue of Winston to celebrate his complicity in nationalism. I think if we build statues at all, we should base it on kindergarten criteria. We should build them after people who were kind to others. We should make them out of Play-Doh in the likeness of feminist Cree mothers, so that we understand history is alive within the choices we make, and our ability to rectify mistakes is what makes us so human. To topple statues takes more courage than platforming warmongers. It is a necessity for living for justice. Maybe there are some of you who would say that he's gone. Let sleeping dogs lie and legacies be forgotten. I think to admit we were wrong is the harder choice to do what's right. And that is why it's the choice worth making. We are people who gather in the square for joy and tragedy alike. We sit under trees and split green onion cakes. We listen to the sounds of lifelong jazz musicians. We taste buds and crush ice and boba on hot days. 4 years after Sir Winston was erected, the Environmental Protection Act codified the requirements for the land's remediation. You see, with a growing knowledge of climate change and ecological collapse, we improved and rectified the system. We changed our beliefs. Based on research and fact, we agreed that some things are worth saving, like the trees and the wetlands that we share with the geese, and the stories of honor that we pass to our children. I think if you've ever said sorry out loud, known remorse is an indication of deep caring. You should stand on the side of the iconoclasts. You should ask for love to be what this city remembers. In the end, is it the name that matters so much? Or is it what we fight for and do there? Is it the legacies we leave behind in our memories, or the ones we create to fight for what's fair? I am asking us to be the opposite of Churchill today, to be brave and fight for what we know to be true. I am asking for empathy for us to dream bigger than heroes, to take a risk. It's the most Edmonton thing we can do. Thank you.
It's hard when you can't hear clapping, so I'm making clapping. Making clapping. As an Irish background person, I appreciate a takedown of Churchill, who, as far as I know, like, I also liked Let Sleeping Dog Lie in that poem because he had a quote. The only thing he ever said that I've found interesting was, dogs look up at you, cats look down on you, but a pig looks you right in the eye. And that's the only, like, what an awful person.
Also, the statue in Churchill Square of him is not even an original, it's a replica. We just bought a copy of a statue somewhere else.
That's
What a
so,
waste of public dollars.
that's so on brand. Like, that's the Canadian feeling about the English shit. Like, it's not ours. It shouldn't be ours. We shouldn't buy replicas of it to erect to, yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna be
Also, if you didn't know, the US Constitution is typeset in an English font. They shipped it from England. It's in my Joe Biden
know
poem.
that it's written on hemp paper. I think the
Yep.
Declaration of Independence is on hemp, which
Anyway, I'll stop now. Thank you.
so everyone, Nisha just gave us a performance that you had me nearly in tears, but at the beginning, and then my emotions went on a road trip. I really appreciate that. So, but everyone, it's the question and answer period time now. Throw your questions in the box. If anyone's already thrown a question and I've missed it, just yell at me in the chat box too. I'm gonna open up with a question based on what you just read. This is my unprepared question. You were poet laureate, and I've always avoided roles like that because I don't know how to go directly at things. I don't know. I've never written a paper properly or anything. And I wondered how you approached the pieces that you had to do in your role. And did you approach it differently than the pieces you didn't do in that role?
Yeah, so like as part of the role of poet laureate, for those of you who don't know, the city has the ability to commission me to celebrate events or to write pieces. Unfortunately, with being in the pandemic for so long, the poets were not called to the act, right? There was no big celebrations. There were no moments of triumph, really. And so most of the work I did, I had a choice to do on my own. I came up with my own volition. As you know, my December poem to City Council is an ongoing poem. It is a poem written for with a word for every death in Alberta from COVID-19. I update that poem when I can, when I have the space for it. And these are projects that I took on my own. The enjoyable parts of the role have been working with, you know, city departments. Like I've been able to host events. I have been able to speak at, you know, equity diversity events because, you know, I'm pretty sure I am the first queer poet laureate to be in the role. I'm a marginalized poet. I'm a disabled poet. These are all like important intersections. And the city has never censored me. And, you know, I am very grateful for that. There have definitely been counselors who did not appreciate what I have to say, but there's also ones who reached out and thanked me in private, even if they can't do so publicly. And as someone who worked in politics, I have a certain degree of sympathy for the political outlook that's required for a job like this. But at no point did I hold back in this job. And at no point did I feel stifled. I felt a lot of fear the first time and the last time and this morning. I felt nervous, but I also know that I learned a lot about myself, and I learned what I stood for by being in this position.
Yeah, because the city I used to live in was Fredericton, and that, like, the poet laureate role ended up taking on a very different feeling for the poet laureate there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I wondered, this is me checking in a very inappropriate moment, I guess.
Yeah, in Fredericton, I think they're changing it, but the poet laureate was required to read at every council meeting, and read poetry from other people and stuff like that. And as the poet laureate,
I will say
Jenna
my
Lynn,
fault.
yeah, well, well, you were there when this was created, so that's a very different role. I get called to council infrequently, basically, and they're recruiting for the new poet laureate now. So I'm really excited to see what happens. But there have been 3 of the last 8 all spoken word poets, and there was also a rapper who's now out in Toronto, and when he became the poet laureate as well, his predecessor refused to acknowledge his skill because he was a young Black rapper. He was the youngest poet laureate we've ever had in Edmonton. And I come from that legacy. I come from the work that he did, the work that Ahmed Nomadic did, to lay the foundation for me to be able to stand in front of council and say, fuck you, you're not doing enough. People are dead and their blood is on your hands.
Yeah, we've talked about this before a little bit because I come from a paper poetry background, but I've run into the snobbishness of the paper poets. But performance is key. Like I never understood poetry just on the page. It's part of the tradition. So I'm gonna admit it. A lot of my questions I have down here are because I'm having trouble writing right now. So I'm asking a lot of process questions. So
Free
guide
advice,
me through
it's
this,
fine.
maybe. How does a poem coming to be happen for you, and how do you get it performance ready? And did the book change that process at all?
Yeah. So poems for me, they're conversations, right? They're written out loud. They're living things. They exist in the universe, in the space that they are created in. And many of them have their first lives on stage for me. So every single poem in this book was performed at some point. And that, I don't get white poets who hide poems, who have secret projects, right? Who are oh, my book comes out in 6 months, pre-order it now, and then you forget, right? I don't believe in that. These poems are alive. These poems are a part of me. And for me, their first homes were in other people's experiences of poetry, And so I write for that. I write for the stage. I write for sharing. I do not write poems to keep to myself for the most part. And that might change later, but I am a performance poet before I'm a page poet. Editing the book was tough because we had to take performance and we had to put it onto the page, and I had to accept and let go with the idea that people who didn't know me were going to read this book. And that they weren't going to know what my voice sounded like. They weren't going to know right away that I was fat, that I was brown, that I was disabled, that I was queer. How do you write a poem without being this is a picture of me? This is what I sound like. And so there was an editing process, and I think Jenna's here. Yeah, there was an editing process there where Jenna was okay, let's tell this story better. Right. So we didn't change a lot. Jenna was very gentle with me, and we changed little things to make sure that, the poem flowed, that the poem worked, that the poem could stand independent of my persona, and some spoken word poets use their larger than life personalities to make up for bad writing. Not a lot of them. Some of them do. And some page poets use.
I was just going to say page poets do that too.
Yeah, they use the page to make up for bad writing. They do fancy things with the text. They indent here for no reason. They left a line and they write a line. And, the poem goes like this, and it's about a snake. And I don't believe in any of that stuff. I think if the words are good, it comes across. And if you're lucky, you get to perform good words. And so working with Jenna was a lot about making sure that the good words still stood on their own. And I'm happy to say that I do think they do. I think that they do stand on their own. How I perform them changes all the time because every single moment of performance is different. They exist in a different time in the timeline of space and time together, right? Like in the universe, they have different perspectives. Every single poem does. And there's poems where, like I'm diabetic, I'm a new diabetic, where I have been ready to pass out because I haven't eaten the whole day. And the poem comes out as like a cry for help. And other times where I'm like well rested and energetic and the poem comes out forcefully. And so like every show, I try to approach it as a unique opportunity to have a conversation. And every poem is a starting place for that.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed poets who know that there are ears that will hear them. Like, it's hard to explain. Like, when you're writing, like I write aloud as well. Like, that's part of my process. But when I'm like, I run into people and I just don't understand what they're doing because it's completely different.
I think the process is interesting. There's a question from Michael Fair.
I was just
and I we were on a podcast a couple years ago about intergenerational perspectives on life and politics and especially queerness, right? And Michael, you are a queer elder to the community, and that's an important role, and I want to acknowledge that. And so we had this. No, I got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Like a really, really interesting conversation about that. And so, yeah, like I think it's interesting. The question is, what are some of the changes since 2019? One of the big ones is that I have made, I have come to an understanding and a working peace with my mother. And a lot of this book deals with a lot of really complicated feelings towards my relationship with my mother and my father. And ironically, like growing up, my parents, there was like a no dating rule. There was like a date within the culture rule. And eventually I think they came to this idea that, I wasn't going to behave, right? Like this wasn't going to be a thing that happened, that they saw any sort of me partnering with someone outside of the culture as a loss of culture, right? And my partner has actually been really instrumental because he bribed my parents. He baked bread at the first family gathering that we had, and he like brought it from his home still warm. And I mentioned this because it's actually like really instrumental because it was a big Christmas party. It was like 50 people and everyone in the house was like, this is amazing. This is the best bread we've ever had. And it was because no one in my family knows how to bake bread. Bread is like a white people food. Okay. We know how to make roti. We know how to make naan. We know how to cook rice, and which are not things my partner can do. And so he's laughing now in the background. And so he brought bread, and it was the first time I've had a partner who understood implicitly the reciprocal nature of Indian families, right? That you bring an offering and you receive love in return. And from that beginning point, we've been on equal footing with my parents. We have reached a mature understanding that I am an adult who makes decisions, who takes care of my health, who has to do things that are hard for them to understand. And then the pandemic was this great, horrible equalizer in which I stayed employed and my parents lost their jobs or lost part of their jobs or most of their jobs. And suddenly I was taking care of them. And that is not in this book. A lot of this book, I'm going to admit it, is like really fucking angry. It's resentful. It's mad about my teenage years where I had an undiagnosed mood disorder, where I took out frustrations on the guys I dated or the people in my life. And I know that's like a really long answer, so I apologize, but I'm still angry, but I'm angry at different things. And I recognize that my parents are human beings who are trying their best. And I'm finally, after like 10 years of intensive therapy, ready to be able to admit that.
I did find it interesting you were talking about your mother earlier, and like I'm very close with my mother, but we are very different. She's not a worrier. She sleeps well every night. We look similar. We're built the exact same body wise. Like there's some similarities that like you'd know we were related, sort of thing. But there's some stuff that's just, and I've never been able to capture I've been able to write about my dad, who like I was estranged from and angry at, but like I've never been able to contain my mother in any of my writing. And I just found, do you think part of the process of writing a book that was dealing with anger and discontentment, even like that, dealing with the mother figure for you was like, you dealt with the father figure in earlier writing, like you had to do both maybe to get to the.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to stop writing about my parents. Only now I do it in a different way. And, you know, your understanding of other people in your life changes with your own perspective. And as I get closer to things like motherhood myself, or family, or marriage and all of that, you know, I understand their experiences from my childhood in a different light, you know, and that like process of humanizing people who sometimes were like, you know, not great to me, who didn't understand me, who came from an entirely different culture in a foreign country, were forced to use a language that wasn't even their first language, you know, and teach me, you know, like I never had, in retrospect, like I didn't have, I should have been more grateful. And I don't think that's the case with everyone. Some people do have estranged relationships. People don't get along, and that's okay too. You have to honor all of that. And I don't think I'm done writing about these things. I think I will discover new lenses with which to approach my own childhood and my own memories, and I will continue to have that influence me into the future.
There are two more questions in the chat box.
So question from Namitha. Do you only write about things you have healed from? What is your take on when you should write about trauma or difficult facets of your life? Yeah, so I teach a lot of workshops around trauma, how to write about trauma, how to deal with trauma in your writing, when not to use art as therapy, how art therapy is important, all of those things. And I think my main takeaway is that if you cannot hold your trauma outside of yourself and see where it's hurting others and hurting you more than it's healing you, you're not ready to write about it. Like, to me, it's a big, spiky, sea urchin-y ball, right? Which at any moment can't be held too tightly or too softly, right? It has to have the right amount of pressure and tension. And if holding your trauma and writing about it hurts you, cuts open your skin, then you haven't healed enough from it. It shouldn't be re-traumatizing to talk about trauma. It should be healing. It should be empowering. We share difficult things to inspire empathy, not pity. And if you're out there trying to get points for pity, and I say points because a lot of people in the audience are spoken word poets or slam poets, if you're trying to get points for sympathy or pity, instead of trying to reach a true understanding with another human being, then I think you're not going to get as much out of poetry, and they're not going to understand you. We have another question from Luca. How do you write about your relationships with other people without tiptoeing or censoring yourself to spare their feelings?
That's probably me and my mom.
That's tough. I read from like a white woman writing creative nonfiction that like you write a different book once your parents die. And I'm like, yeah, duh. Like, grief changes people. No shit. You know, like it's like a big, terrible thing, right? Like, have your parents die. Of course, that's going to fundamentally change you. I think it's tough because there are things in my first book, like dealing with queerness, for instance, that I don't explore fully because I don't know if my parents understand the word queer. They've read it in the newspapers, they've read it online, people have used it, but they don't get it. And that's fine. We just kind of operate on this blank spot, right? We don't talk about it. And that's the piece that I've made with it. I don't censor, but I have a big repertoire of poems. So I do sometimes change my set list. You know, I do sometimes keep poems for certain audiences. And it's going to be really tough when my next book comes out because like that book is like, my parents really come from a culture where admitting you are disabled is like a big mark of shame. But I am disabled. I do have a mental illness. I do have a physical disability. These are difficult things to write about. And my next book is a 300-page meditation on disability and illness. And they are going to have to understand that the way I view myself is valid and worthwhile. Do I still censor? I do, because poetry is not the most important thing in my life. My relationships to other people are. Poetry is not going to save me from death. It's not going to, help me when I'm low on blood sugar and passing out. Like, people I love are going to do that. And I care more about them than I do about writing books. Lindsay's asking, can you tell us when your next book will come out? I cannot, because it's not finished, and who fucking knows?
And
No one wants. I should just say, I don't know who wants to publish like a 300-page memoir. Like, if you know, you tell me, because like, this is, I don't even know if it's poetry. Like, literally, I sent it.
Will say that publishing schedules, like at the press, we are just signed a book for fall 2023. So like, when you get it accepted, you have a while.
Sure. Yeah. Like, publishing takes so long, but like, yeah, I don't know. I have no clue. I'm not rushing this time. I'm not trying to reach a finish line. I'm not trying to get words out there as fast as possible. I'm sitting here recognizing that writing about disability is really fucking hard. And I'm taking it slowly as I need to, so that I'm not sitting there cutting myself open for other people to see. This is a really personal book. It's a really fascinating project, even objectively speaking, because I requisitioned all my own medical records and I'm using it as source material and as found poetry for the manuscript. And so a lot of it are direct notes from, let's say, like 6 months of intensive group therapy, and so like, it is extremely personal. And I'm hoping that it will come out with a press that lets me print in color. And so that's really the only thing I can tell you.
Yeah, Alexis has been just put that writing during the pandemic about anything is challenging, let alone.
It is.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting, because this year I've received more commissions than ever in my life, just in the last 12 months. So I've probably produced upwards of 300 pages of writing, but all of it has come at a very deep cost, right? It has come at the cost of my socialization, which doesn't exist right now. It has come at the cost of me being able to cook dinner for myself every day of the week, which I can't. It has come at the cost of my time and my sleep, and my energy. And like, some days I don't think it was all worth it, right? Like, was making an extra, whatever I made worth it? Were the likes on Instagram worth it? I don't know, but I'm trying really hard to find balance. And I'm doing my best to get there.
I accidentally somehow made my screen the thing full screen and I couldn't see anything. No, like, I've written one poem since the pandemic started. I can't even read poetry right now.
And that's valid. Yeah.
And I'm trying, that's why all my questions are processed, because I'm like fighting process myself right now. And I'm like, both you and Bertrand were talking about like new projects, and I'm like, oh, like, just do it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Shrina's asking, what's your self-care routine? How do you ground yourself after writing poems that do deal with trauma? What a great question, Shrina. Thank you for asking. Self-care is tough. Honestly, like, being diagnosed with diabetes, which is not a fun, easy illness to have, has now required me to take over like 7 or 8 pills a day, constant monitoring of my blood sugar, constant like poking needles in myself, constant dealing with insurance paperwork and dealing with receipts, and making, like, I can't wake up and skip breakfast because it will kill me, right? Like, these are things that I'm reading every label when I go to the grocery store. And like, doing that has forced myself to pay attention to my body in a way that I wasn't willing to do before, right? Like, what am I giving to my body? What does it need, right? And like, some days I need more rest than others, which is why I'm leaving the poetry festival, right? I can't do 3 jobs at once. I can't keep working 70-hour weeks. Other days it's, I write a poem that's hard or difficult. I just wrote like a 7-minute poem the other day on disability, on accepting the word disability into my life. And I had to sit back and I had to focus on my physical needs. I had to eat, I had to sleep, I had to take a bath, right? And being in tune with a body you've hated most of your life and finally learning to love it is more self-care than you could ever do in terms of like bath bombs or like taking walks, right? And like knowing that like a chest pain could be pneumonia again, knowing that, it's, at any point, like numbness in my toes is a symptom of like something that could happen if I have diabetes. Knowing that, if I take a 2-hour nap like I did earlier today, it's probably because I'm about to go into a coma and not because I'm just tired, or maybe it's both. And having that conversation with something that doesn't speak, like your literal body, I'm sorry, I don't mean to like keep going on about it, but like for years I thought my brain was the enemy because I have I have bipolar disorder and I was undiagnosed for 5 years. And you start to not trust any of your own thoughts or your own actions or your own beliefs even. And like the enemy is inside yourself. And then to find out that my pancreas is also giving up, like that was like a big fuck you, for my body was like, we're one system. You can't ignore us, right? Like you have to pay attention. And like having subjected myself to things like an eating disorder and restricted dieting and starvation and self-harm, like, finally, I love my body and I am so grateful it has made it this far. But paying attention to it and learning that it is a part of me and not something to fight has been a huge process in accepting limitations. And I just mean to say, like, I've been doing the research on it, but disability is a social construct. In a society where everyone has resources, no one and everyone is disabled because it means you are able to achieve to your best of your abilities and that no one discriminates against you if your best is different from someone else's best. And so one of the arguments that's being made right now is that everyone in Palestine who is under occupation is disabled because of their abilities being limited. Black slaves were all disabled because no one can live under those conditions. No one should be, told they achieved the same as a white person did under those conditions. I am disabled because my insurance costs me $600 a month. And some of you get to go to Jasper and Banff on the weekends, right? Like this is the difference between a society that accepts disability and one that doesn't.
Yeah, like so many people I know are dealing with this. Like I'm in my mid-30s and I'm dealing with this and just swaths. Yeah, I'm excited for your book. That's all I want to say. And someone said this is the best introductory course.
Well, it's like the blind leading the blind, which is a terrible situation because I'm like just learning it. You can be a disabled person and not know the academic discourse, and because I don't need to know the discourse. I live in this body. This is what I know to be true.
Yeah, like because I went and got my ADHD diagnosed because I hurt my back and it made my ADHD worse because I couldn't sleep even more than I wasn't sleeping already.
Yeah.
And
Sleep's
since
a big
then,
one. Sleep's a big one. Yeah.
I've had to respect what I can and can't do and stop myself from doing harm to myself.
For sure.
Like
but like I said, like it's a construct, right? Like you only feel bad because other people have told you to feel bad for sleeping in or for like I sleep in every day of my life. I sleep 10 hours a night on a good night. Today I got 5 hours, but I sleep 10 hours because I need that. And I work from 12 p.m. to 4 a.m. Like,
Well, we've talked about that, how we're not actually up at the same time because I am a morning person with ADHD.
You know how hard it is for me to talk to someone who works a 9 to 5 in Toronto? There's like 2 good hours where we're both available.
I got on Saturday night, I got 2.5 hours sleep. But I went to bed at 8:30, like, but it didn't work. Like, there's like, it's so interesting to me, like, how there's so many ways for society to make us feel like we're broken, I guess, and we're not broken because we're not productive in the same way other people are productive. Sorry, I could go on a rant, but I shouldn't. It's your birthday and your lunch.
No, it's fine. I love talking on my birthday. It's my favorite thing. I actually usually host very elaborate 100-person birthday parties, which I haven't been able to do for 2 years. And I say elaborate because like my cousins and I have planning committees where we figure out the theme for the year and who's gonna get what and like everything that's gonna be involved in the setup. Prep takes like 2 days usually. Cleanup takes like 24 hours. It's like, yeah. So I went to the park this year.
It's my birthday at the end of May, so we're both May babies. And
Yeah.
I usually request Chinese food and binge watching a show because I'm like
Amazing.
the opposite.
I would recommend The Good Place.
I've seen half of it. I like the title and the location. Like
right. I'm actually I'm rewatching House as part of writing my book to understand, and it's interesting because like I used to love medical dramas and then I stopped when I got really sick the first 10 times, and now I'm like revisiting and I'm just like, this is like, you know,
I'm a problem to be solved.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's really interesting.
So I don't think that I'm going to ask one more question and then I think we'll do the wrap up. So generally when I talk to poets about their collections, Bertrand, you can hop in on this if you want to. One of the most challenging things is deciding on which order the poems go in. Because generally poets, unless you're doing a project book where you've outlined the whole project before doing it, you're writing piecemeal and then it's like put all these pieces together. And I have to say, I really like I think of it as organic, the way your collection is organized and the way that pieces flow into each other, but push against each other as well. And they don't have, like, there's no sections. It just feels real to me. How did you go about organizing your book? Was it challenging? And why no sections?
Yeah, so I wanted the book to be a set, right? Like if you're doing a show, let's say I read the book front to back, what would that show feel like? And I read you both the first and the last poem of the book today because I wanted to give breadth and I wanted to give depth to what this book is about. And for me, it's really important that I can read a book backwards and forwards, that the first poem and the last poem are both important, that I can flip to anywhere in a book and be engrossed with it. I read 65 books for the League of Canadian Poets as I juried their award. And by the way, some real racist shit out there. And you know what? Like some of
I was clapping for Bertrand, not the racism. I want to say.
No. Bertrand, who's the winner that I helped pick, no bias there whatsoever. Some of these books don't stand up after 20 pages. They fall completely flat. Other books don't get started until 50 pages in, you know? And I'm like, can you ask that of a reader? Should you be writing books in such a way that 50 pages are just dead weight? You know, how much do I reward a book that has 3 good poems and 10 bad ones, right? And then, like, for me, I was like, I need this to be a show. This book is a show. You know, what would keep people engaged? And so there's a flow to the book, right? There are periods of release. There are periods of tension where something is really difficult to read about. And then other periods which are more solitary, more time for yourself, time to reflect. And this is a very deliberate order that I went through. I also had to make sure there weren't too many poems about my mother in a row. That was like an arbitrary rule I set for myself where I was like, okay, that was 4 in a row. Let's mix some of them up. My project poems are not all in order. So I have a series of self-portraits in that as well. And they're kind of mixed up. And so it wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a performance choice.
Yeah, I always think of it as a mixtape.
Yeah, exactly.
So
which is a title I contemplated for one of my chapbooks. I just wanted to call it mixtape.
Yeah, because you can't have the same turn at the end. Like that's a big thing I notice when I read books. I'm like,
yeah. Oh, I would love to hear Bertrand how you did it, because like, so my understanding of Bertrand, your book, is that it flows the way the rivers flow in many ways, right? That this is a geographical story as well as a historical one. And you weave in and out of place and time in such eloquent ways. So yeah, I'd love to hear.
I didn't have a really good process, to be honest. I mean, it was fascinating hearing about you and, hearing about like a set. I think that's, I'm jealous, frankly, because I think it's just such a living way of expressing the words themselves, right? For you, because you perform them and so they're live. But, I hate to say this, I think it's really like where my English degree came in. Because basically what happened is I had about 200 poems and I thought, well, they're not all good, first of all, so we'll weed those bad ones out. And then I just had a mess of poems and I had to decide, well, what do I see here? I wasn't even sure what I had exactly. So I just sat and I read over and over and over again until I could pick out themes. And then I just started to emphasize certain things. I didn't know when I started writing these poems that I would be accessing the landscape so regularly. I didn't know that. I just had started writing poems. Some of them had to deal with the landscape. Some of them dealt with history. Some of them had a bit of my biography. Many of the biographical poems didn't actually make it into the collection. Probably a good thing, because often when I'm writing biographical poems, they're akin to my high school or junior high school poetry. So after I looked through all of them, I realized that nature seems to be something that I'm grappling with. And then it struck me that that's obvious because, when people are talking about this thing that's called Alberta, often we associate it with nature. We talk about the prairies, we talk about agriculture and things like that. And I thought to myself, well, of course, this is what you're doing. You're trying to rewrite a landscape is what you're trying to do. And so then I just looked at what is my landscape. And from there, honestly, it was just English degree all the way. I just sort of picked themes and I analyzed themes and I rearranged things.
Mhm.
It took a long time. I was not prepared for how long it takes to figure out the sequencing of poems. But luckily for me, because I wrote them all around the same time, they were all written in the same frame of mind. And so they all kind of have a certain feel to them. So I'm sorry to say it was nothing all that great. It was just that English degree, frankly.
But I
Right
think
now-
that like our backgrounds really inform that process. Like because I went to business school, a set is almost like a business plan, right? Like how do you convince
Interesting.
someone you're worth listening to when you only have 5 minutes at a mic, when you only have 15 minutes at a mic? Which is in itself, like I've heard it before from people who enter MFA programs from doing spoken word, that spoken word is a strict form in and of itself. It is formalism. And approaching the writing of a book sometimes takes that into account as well. So I definitely think your process is also valuable, like overwrite and then get to pick the best parts. I didn't have that luxury. I had what I had and I had to make do,
Well, what you had was obviously you made do, obviously.
Thank you.
The collection I was working on before the pandemic, I literally got to the point where I didn't know how to organize. So that's why I'm asking this question. So I have it organized by alphabetically by the fourth last word in each poem. And I'm like, this probably isn't the way to do this. So I'm gonna take this both on board, both processes, and see what happens. I just want to thank everyone for being here, especially Nisha on her birthday. I don't know if I mentioned that it's Nisha's birthday. You guys asked questions. I prepare questions, and it's such a weight off my heart that we didn't have to get to my silly questions that are like grasping at straws. You guys are so much deeper than I will ever be. I appreciate your depth and your willingness to ask these things. I never know what to do. So thank you. Thank you so much. Please visit our website. It's newspress.com. There's one W in that. I'm gonna throw the link up while I talk because I'm a grown-up. There's one W because we're weird, New West Press. All our books are there, including Bertrand and Nisha's, but more
You get them at
importantly,
the same time.
Yeah, you can get them at the same
They're
time.
very different, but you should read them both.
But you should support local bookstores. Like for us, our local is Glass Bookshop, and Bertrand's local, sort of, Shelf Life Books. And yeah, so you should definitely head there. I will throw the links up once I stop talking because I failed at putting the links up already. Oh. There we go. And other ways to keep in the know about what we're doing, because we post our events on our website too. You can follow us on social media. Social media links are up. And you can
I just
sign
want
up
to say
for
a
our
big thank you
newsletter.
to Claire and to New
Sorry.
West and to Bertrand for reading at the event. And yeah, it's just it's tough being in this position. Bertrand and I were really hoping we would have a launch together in person many months ago. And so when that hope died, we were still able to come here. So appreciate everyone for sticking around, and just big thank you to New West and everything that the New West team does.
And thank you for Nisha for discovering the exact moment when my ADHD medicine wore out and saving me from myself.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Do you have anything else to add, Claire?
Yes, thanks again. As I always say at the end of events, remember, if you can, please continue to support small publishers and bookstores of any size. We wouldn't be here without you all. And that's it.
Cool. All right. I'm going to go.